And now I'm going to hand it off to introduce our guest speaker, for Nora to do the introduction, and to just let folks know that the first segment after Nora does the introduction will be a video presentation.
Yeah, it's a pleasure for me and a privilege actually to be able to introduce William Storr, who I'm not going to tell you specifically, but I was just wowed when I saw his work. He is a former map maker at the National Geographic and an experienced, I would say, extraordinary painter with international exposure. At the core of his work is the desire to explore fundamental issues of our time: intolerance, discrimination, addiction, violence, weaknesses, and survivors are all central to his themes. His portraiture incorporates his fascination with the neuroscience of how a viewer perceives a portrait and projects their own thoughts and experiences into that visual depiction. Our introduction to Bill Storr and his work will begin, as Joellen was saying, with a video, which gives us a brief glimpse of some of his art and his inspiration, and that it speaks for itself and how impactful this work is. So, Will, thanks very much for doing this, and welcome.
I paint to make a difference. I want to be part of a larger conversation, to engage, motivate, and heal. I want to be part of the solution. As I see it, my job as an artist is to get you to think, ask questions, and then to act. So where do I start? Can I spark an honest discussion to help remove the stigma that covers up and hides issues? I know this means tackling the human condition with all of its suffering, as well as the perseverance, forgiveness, and love. And in the end, simply being affected doesn't cut it. It means getting help. It means allowing someone to help you. It means helping.
The paintings are very much abstract paintings. You know, I love this juxtaposition of abstract over parts that are very realistic. And so you've got a painting, maybe an abstract when you're close, and when you back up, you all of a sudden see the person that looks very real to you. So I'm always playing with color and line, and I like to spill paint right on my paintings. I like to move it around. And this is basically random events occur as a result of this. It's like a map, isn't it? It's like rivers in Alaska showing up on a map or on an aerial photograph. The drip on a painting may be random, but what I do with it is not. As artists, so many of us are looking for reality in some way, and so I guess I'm looking for the playfulness and the experimentation and the excitement of pouring paint and to move it around with my squeegee. And it's all part of the fun of, I mean, if this isn't fun, then why am I doing it? No, actually, that's interesting that I said that, because on the other hand, I think as an artist, I have a responsibility to speak to the times, and the times aren't necessarily fun.
I have a marked up copy of Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. You all remember the caterpillar and the Cheshire Cat, right? But do you recall the first words from the caterpillar upon meeting Alice? Who are you? And the Cheshire Cat's first words to Alice? Where do you want to go? Who are you and where do you want to go? Having the answers to these two questions put me on the road to finding my artistic voice. That's my passion and the road to get there. But I'm not there yet. The most important question is, well, we'll talk about that later, because now I'd like to take you on an adventure to explore my art, my message, and the science behind it. Lots of things influence me. Ideas seem to come out of the blue, but I guess my art is most influenced by the ideas of the early Cubists and my interest in the visual brain. For a long time now, artists have intuitively known what scientists are now confirming: how we create, how we perceive, and how we respond to art. Leonardo, Michelangelo, Vermeer, Monet, and Picasso all understood a great deal about visual perception. Did they know that while our eyes take in a puzzle of light, lines, and shapes, our brains pull it together, figure out what it is, and then decide how it feels about it? My art focuses on victims, witnesses, and survivors. Let me tell you why. My sister OD'd and died. She was 57. I tell myself that it wasn't suicide, but rather an accidental overdose washed down with a bottle of vodka. Emma used booze, pot, meth in high school. But when she had the first of her failed back surgeries, prescription opiates invaded her life. And when the pain continued, the doctors were all too willing to prescribe more to this known addict. And of course, this wasn't something that we talked about. The trusted small-town family doctor said her spinal afflictions were the result of her falling down when drunk, which she did. But he misdiagnosed the cause. He couldn't see the beautiful woman behind the drunken addict. He couldn't get beyond this stereotype, the stigma. AA didn't work. The intervention failed. She was kicked out of her first residential treatment program. But on the third day of a marathon heart to heart, as I talked and pleaded and cajoled, exhausting all of my ideas, from out of the blue, I promised Emma that I would paint her portrait if she went back to rehab. The door opened just a crack. She agreed, and for 5 years, she seemed to be in recovery. It was wonderful to see her laugh and smile. But then her beautiful husband died. Then more back surgeries, more pills. She relapsed. She died. There's this voice in the back of my head always whispering, "What good is your art? What does it accomplish? Does it really matter?" I started to broadly explore victims of violence, bigotry, and addiction. Viewers interpreted my work with their own subjective context related to their own experience, which is exactly what I wanted. But again, that voice returned and asked, "How can you honestly relate to these issues?" Well, I can relate to addiction, not as a victim, but as a witness. And I know about stigma. Stigma suffocates discussion, impedes action, causes pain, and just like you, I want it to stop. Emma OD'd, but maybe to the millions affected, I could be part of a solution. Stigma seemed like the right place to start. With alcohol and drug abuse, it's never just one person that's affected. And so the faces I now paint are the faces of all those affected, the victims, the witnesses, the survivors. 10 years ago, I went to Madrid and witnessed Picasso's Guernica, arguably the greatest painting of the last 100 years. Guernica exploded my brain. I could hear the screams and feel the flames burn my flesh. I was there. I cried. It was a reality beyond paint and canvas, and I was driven to understand how Picasso did it. I studied everything I could find about the early Cubists. What were they thinking? What were they talking about? I learned that it was their goal to cause you to experience a painting in a way that is more than simply observing an image, to evoke a greater reality. They discussed how they could experience the fourth dimension, the passage of time, with multiple views, memory cues, and the exclusion of techniques that freeze an image in time, like perspective and lighting. Today's scientists say that the Cubists were really onto something. I don't see a snapshot of you. I discern light, lines, and shapes, and I process them along with a wave of non-linear memory images and other cues, which I recognize as you. I think to our common sense, perceiving change as time may be a way that we get a taste of this greater reality. So I try to introduce change into my art, change in expression, mood, color, shape, and more. Picasso said, quote, "I paint objects as I think them, not as I see them. And when it's finished, it still goes on changing according to the state of mind of whoever is looking at it," unquote. Well, Picasso is telling me that I lose control of the painting the minute I quit work on it and it is seen, experienced, and interpreted by others, and that meaning is subjective and never fixed. Picasso knew that we see not with our eyes, but with our brains. We are captive to our own experience, perspective, and anxieties. They influence our perception of meaning, reality, and truth. So I pursue this greater reality with visual effects that other artists have used, and some new ones that I've stumbled upon, which, as it turns out, are of interest to science. People ask, what can brain science tell us about art? But I think the better question is, what can art tell us about the brain? Art presents an opportunity to study how the visual brain gathers, processes, and reacts to stimuli, inducing a complex emotional experience. I parlay experiments and accidents into my style and method, and just like you, I get an idea, I experiment, I observe, and then maybe I retain, discard, modify, or repeat. I paint big faces with ambiguous expressions. We are attracted to faces, right? It's our nature. Look how babies respond to faces, how they mirror your smile. That's no accident. We are probably hardwired for this. So I paint a lot of self-portraits. This is a very early one. For little kids, faces are where it's at. This is important to them. It's as if we don't have bodies, just faces with arms and legs. We devote more brain power to studying the details of faces than to any other object. Now, here is a friend's granddaughter's drawing of her pregnant mother. Okay, eyes. Eye contact tells us that we exist. We are drawn to eyes, and so I exploit a shared gaze. When eyes lock, you are invited to slip behind the other's eyes and see what they see. And in those eyes that I paint, just by chance, I started using small amounts of discordant colors that are complementary or generally opposite on the color wheel and are of equal value or luminance. A neuroscientist friend asked me, why was I using equal luminance complementary colors, and how did I learn to do that? Well, I said, I put green in, and had just read where the artist Wolf Kahn said, when in doubt, put purple next to green, and maybe a little blue. And I thought, while I'm at it, why not add red, the complement of green, and how about some orange? And people said they looked real. So real. When did you see someone with orange, red, green, blue, and purple eyes? And my friend said, it doesn't matter. The color didn't need to be accurate to seem alive. Equal value complementary colors seen together throw our brains into a tizzy. Monet knew how to use discordant color, but he probably didn't know that cones capture line and color, and rods capture value and shading. He didn't know that they respond at different speeds, have separate neural pathways, and are processed in different parts of the brain. He just knew he could make red poppies in a green field sway in the breeze. And the early morning sun glow and shimmer on the water. Well, now that I have your attention with seemingly real eyes, I can start to do other things with line and color. Vague and scribbled outlines, caricature, and unfinished sections become part of a recognizable whole. As you complete the portrait your way, I give you some raw material along with some realistic cues, and you make the person real. At some level, did Leonardo understand rods and cones? Harvard professor of neurobiology, Margaret Livingstone, analyzed the Mona Lisa's face, which she filtered to separate the shading from the line work. Let me describe her findings, and it starts with the eyes. We have a lot more rods, think shading and value, than cones, think color and line, except in this tiny spot in our central retina, which is packed with cones. As Leonardo engages you with Mona Lisa's eyes, you see a smile or grin peripherally because you are predominantly using rods, which are seeing the shading. The same is true if you view her from a distance, as you proportionally engage more rods. But when you look at her directly at her mouth, up close, she has less of a grin because you are predominantly using cones in your central retina, which is seeing the line work, which is less smiling. Leonardo has given us inconsistent line and shading cues. So I look at that and I say, well, what else can I do? How else can I use Leonardo's idea of change through shifting expressions? So I started to paint slightly different expressions from one side of the face to the other. This frequently results in an ambiguous overall expression, or sometimes one which causes you to exclusively see one or the other expression at different times. So maybe based on these conflicting cues, you create the emotion based on how you feel at any given time. Well, sometimes I take this to the extreme, not sure it works, but I have fun with it. But more often than not, I paint a face with just slightly misaligned features. The eyes, nose, and lips don't line up. They seem to be on different facial planes, not fractured, just different planes, not static, but changing. So, Vermeer. Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring is an exemplar of higher level ambiguity. Vermeer has set the stage for you to complete the narrative. Is she inviting or frightened? Is she innocent, pure, or seductive? With a simple glance and a shared gaze, Vermeer created an ambiguity that results in mutually exclusive emotional responses that at any one time seem very correct and very real to you. So I play with this. And I've learned that ambiguity creates a vacuum that you want to fill. And you will do a better job than I can, creating and recreating the painting and narrative with your own perfect mental image and projected emotions. When I started to paint these big 7-foot faces, I tried to figure out how to fill in these expansive foreheads and the spaces between the other features. And so I decided to treat these spaces as separate abstract paintings. Up close, my paintings are an abstract mix of lines, dots, strips, and splatters, but from a distance, some change to almost photoreal. And you can't see the forest and the trees at the same time. You interpret the painting differently depending on your viewing distance. So you get 2 paintings for the price of 1. This is known as global versus local vision. And I'm sure most of you know who Chuck Close is. And of course, he's well known for this. Well, my interests keep evolving. The questions never stop. The ideas keep coming, and I keep experimenting. I am fascinated by the gestalt of grand churches. And I'm fascinated by religious art, especially Byzantine works. I now routinely use gold and silver metallic paints, which sometimes produce a change of expression and mood with changes in lighting and angle of view. I have lots of questions. How can the color red denote love and violence? And why does it trigger an immediate gut reaction? What is the effect of curved, jagged, or straight lines on our emotions? What is the effect of a mask? Who is behind the mask? Can I go behind the mask and look out? Do men interpret paintings differently than women? In my case, they sure do. But why? Can too much color get in the way and confuse the brain? The early Cubists thought so. You only have to look at their early paintings, how monochromatic they were. So on the surface, this looks like a simple abstract face. But I have incorporated a shared gaze, metallic paint, muted color, caricature, out of alignment facial features, eyes with discordant color, a mask, and a mix of dimensional and flattened surfaces. I think a recipe with any or all of these ingredients might make my faces appear more real, as your perception of change in time affects your consciousness. I want to provoke you into creating a reality that is more than a simple image. So now we have COVID. Our son and his wife had their hands full with work, a 2nd grader, online school, and a newborn. So we decided that we would much rather be with our family and help where we can. We closed up our Boulder, Colorado home and temporarily moved to Silver Spring. Now, because of the pandemic, I've had 3 solo exhibitions postponed. I lost an audience at the worst possible time. And it didn't make sense to set up a studio here in DC. It was time to reinvent myself. I have an iPad and an extensive online following. It was time to put it to greater use. I can't experiment with paint drips, but I can experiment with layers of color. I miss throwing paint and making large sweeping strokes with my large brushes. But I also recognize that much of my painting is done with small brushes as I place tiny micro dots, lines, and other marks across the surface of each canvas. I love the scale of my 7-foot canvases, but now I can digitally project them billboard size. I love the way my paintings hang together on a gallery wall, but now I can animate them and create a never-ending and always changing virtual exhibition. I love experimenting and learning new ways to handle paint, but now I can learn and experiment with iMovie, Photoshop, and GarageBand. But most of all, I believe that reinventing myself is a way to take my art to a new level and to more effectively get my message out digitally to those that matter the most: victims, witnesses, and survivors. Several years ago, I began to seriously draw on my iPad. I started with simple lines from life. Can I capture essence with a line such that the line no longer looks like a person, but has that person's qualities? This is lane dancing. Can you feel her glide and drift across the floor? I start now with very high resolution images of iPad drawings or my own existing paintings, which I take into Photoshop and my iPad. I repurpose them, adding a range of lines, marks, and other graphic elements. I then have them printed on metallic paper, which is fused to a large aluminum panel. I also incorporate them into video presentations, ranging from a simple projection to a movie short. Okay, so now it's time to get back to those two most important words, the words I talked about 20 minutes ago. This is the question, so what? So what? It's the most important question every artist should ask. So what? Can you feel what she feels? Can empathy beget action? Can I make a difference? Simply being affected is not enough. People have strong, passionate reactions to my work. Some cry. They share their stories of loved ones, families, and communities devastated. They paint a picture of the suffering, the chaos, and helplessness, but they also describe resilience, forgiveness, and hope. Some say they intend to get help or finally start that intervention. Some take the handouts I have. Some thank me simply for recognizing them. I exist. I am not alone. I have more than 300,000 social media followers. Some write to me. One woman wrote and said that after seeing this painting, that she knew that I understood her and that she wanted to die. The next morning, she looked at the very same painting and this time saw hope in the woman's eyes. And she then understood that she too could have hope. She said to me, "You saved my life." I want to start conversations to cause people to relate, respond, and take action before it is too late, to be part of the solution, to erase the stigma. Emma, my sister, said that she was evil. Oh my, where did that come from? No, you are not evil. No, you are not alone. Yes, we can discuss this. Yes, you can get help. Yes, there is hope. That was my message to Emma. But I also want hope to be a call to action. Just as with AIDS, I believe that solving the stigma of addiction will take a groundswell from artists, poets, playwrights, writers, teachers, and you. You are in the trenches. You care. You save lives. Thank you. Be well.
Bill, thanks a lot. I mean, this is quite extraordinary and very, very moving. And I would say that, yes, through art, you give a perspective of the world, but you also, just like you say, you recreate a vision internally. You elicit an emotion. And even though you say, yes, emotions by themselves may not be enough, without that emotional reaction, people don't have the will to do what is necessary to change things that are wrong. So I think the power that you have in communicating the problems of our civilization right now, but on making us feel, I think is extraordinary. Well,
Well, thank
and
you.
thanks very much for sharing with us. I know I've been looking at the chat. There's a lot of interest. And I see Jack jumping in, who was going to be guiding the answer and question. So I'm going to shut up and let then back to Jack. But Will, thanks very, very much. It was
Yes,
really
indeed.
quite remarkable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill and Nora. Thank you for inviting Bill. Just for everyone's knowledge, Bill came to us. Actually, we met probably a couple of years ago. Bill reached out to NIDA as to how he can help, and this relationship is in the throes of evolving. There's been a videotape that's been done that we're working on that we'll be posting in the near future, so you can learn more about his work. And we suspect we'll be seeing more of you in the future, Bill. There have been a number of comments and questions really around the your perspective on artists and the impact of substance use disorder on them, and how in fact it can get carried out into the work. If you do have a brief moment to comment, that would be appreciated. And then we're going to take the other comments and get back to you and get further information that you can share with the NIDA audience.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's actually easy for me to answer because I don't know. You know, the artists that I'm close to, I don't see any issues. I don't see issues with alcohol. I don't see issues with drugs. I see the only thing they're addicted to is their work. Now, I certainly am not naive enough to think that there aren't many different cases out there, but I haven't experienced it myself.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Well, we're going to keep on talking with you.
Okay, great, good.
And your attention and your interest around how art can help change the conversation and stigma towards addiction is so key. And the connection with how our brain processes things is really a beautiful blend between what you do and what NIDA is all about. So thank you again.